Mark Cuban just bragged about violating federal law in his hiring practices. I'm thinking if you used to work for a company owned or managed by Mark Cuban or any of his entities and subsidiaries, you might have a lawsuit on your hands. Mark Cuban is a very successful man. You see him on Shark Tank. He used to own the Dallas Mavericks. I think they just sold the Dallas Mavericks, didn't they? Or maybe he still owns them. I'm not sure. And he's been really active lately on the X platform, arguing with Elon Musk and other random people over the issue of DEI. See, he's a champion of hiring based on diversity, equity, and inclusion. He doesn't think that DEI should be pushed out. He thinks that it's a business's corporate advantage to utilize DEI practices, which, of course, we'll keep saying the same thing. Mark, if you think you've got the secret sauce, why are you forcing everybody else to use that secret sauce? You think DEI is going to make you the most successful businessman? Then keep it yourself. That's your secret weapon. Use it and let the rest of the people who don't want to utilize DEI, who just want to, hire and promote on merit and nothing else, well, let them languish and go out of business. You'll be able to buy up their company, pennies on the dollar. But that's not his strategy here. He's very aggressive. He wants to make sure everybody goes and uses DEI, I guess, so that everybody's handicapped in the same way. Well, he had an amazing exchange on X with somebody that goes by Rabbit Hole. Like I said, he'll talk to anybody. And the Rabbit Hole said, I believe in a colorblind meritocracy. This means I'm against forms of hiring which undercut merit, including forms of hiring which cut out merited individuals over their group association. Now, let me just point out the fact that that is literally exactly the position of Martin Luther King. Exactly the position. I want my little girls to be judged based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, if you embraced that idea, and most of the 90s, if you embraced that idea, you were, in fact, the tolerant one. If you pushed against that, if you said, no, forget about what you're capable of, forget about your merits, forget about the content of your character, we're going to judge you based on the color of your skin. That's the most important thing to evaluate you on. Those were the racists. But now we've come full circle. Now the Rabbit Hole is the racist, according to Mark Cuban. So Mark Cuban responded to that with this now infamous tweet. I've never hired anyone based exclusively on race, gender, or religion. I only ever hire the person that will put my business in the best position to succeed. Now, notice he doesn't say the most qualified person, just the person who puts my business in the best position to succeed. And by the way, that could mean, if I'm up for a government contract and I hire a certain number of DEI individuals that fill out a quota and give me a certain percentage of my employees that fall under certain categories, then I'll get that government contract and that will help my company to succeed. You see how this works? Really interesting language he used. But then he went further. He said, yes, race and gender can be part of the equation. I view diversity as a competitive advantage. And then he goes on and asks questions of the Rabbit Hole. Let me just be clear. Mark Cuban just admitted on Elon Musk's X social media platform that he takes race and gender into account when hiring people for his private business. That's kind of a big deal. In fact, someone named Andrea R. Lucas, who, as you can see based on her handle, is with the EEOC. You see, she's a commissioner for the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That's the government commission that specifically is supposed to root out employers who use race and gender when hiring people. She replied to Mark Cuban. And she said, Mr. Cuban, EEOC commissioner here, unfortunately, you're dead wrong on black letter Title VII law. As a general rule, race or sex can't even be a motivating factor, nor a plus factor, tiebreaker, or tipping point. It's important employers understand the ground rules here. In other words, Mark Cuban just admitted to violating federal law in his hiring practice. In fact, Mark Cuban just bragged about violating federal law in his hiring practices. I'm thinking if you used to work for a company owned or managed by Mark Cuban or any of his entities and subsidiaries, you might have a lawsuit on your hands. Or if you applied for a job and didn't get hired by Mark Cuban or one of his companies or one of the companies owned by one of his subsidiaries. I'm quite sure you have a lawsuit on your hand. You might want to look into it and get a good lawyer. There's another DEI story that's developing on the X platform that I wanted to bring your attention to as well. Tracing Woodgrains, who is an anonymous tweeter who put together, by the way, a multi-thousand word tweet that I'm showing you right now. Go ahead and check it out for yourself because it's fascinating. It tells the story of a class action lawsuit against the Federal Aviation Administration right now, the FAA, which is under the umbrella of the Department of Transportation, run by Pete Buttigieg. A scandal with the FAA has been moving on a slow burn through the courts for a decade, culminating in the class action lawsuit currently known as Brigida v. Secretary Pete, brought by a class who spent years and thousands of dollars in coursework to become air traffic controllers, only to be dismissed by a pass-fail biographical questionnaire with a greater than 90% fail rate. I just want to pause there for a minute. These are people who went through all the coursework, all of the education, all of the preliminary testing to make sure that they're qualified to be air traffic controllers. And then over 90% of them were failed out, not because of their abilities, not because of their intelligence, not because of their merit, but because they failed what's called a biographical questionnaire. In other words, questions about their origins, about where they came from, about what their family life was like, their biography. It was implemented without warning after many of them had already taken and passed a skill assessment. The questionnaire awarded points for factors like lowest grade in high school is science, something explicitly admitted by the FAA in a motion to deny glass certification. So there's legal documents here that he posted as well, and I want you to check those out and read into it. Of course, you should always educate yourself on these issues, but that the government actually admitted to the fact that one of the questions was if you had the lowest grade in high school was science, they would actually award points to you. Now, I don't know, maybe it's me, but I would think that for a job like air traffic controller, having a pretty good functioning knowledge of science would be critically important and something that we, the government, would value when hiring people for such a critical job. But no, if you actually got low grades in high school for science, you were elevated on the list of hires, which, by the way, is incredibly racist because the whole idea here is that the FAA is going through a diversity hiring practice here. And so think about this. How racist is it for the FAA to say, you know what, we need more diversity, we got to hire more minorities, so let's start awarding people who had low grades in science? I'm sorry, what? Well, because if they had low grades in science, they're probably, one of those people. This is your Department of Transportation. And this is how these policies are put into practice. There's no other word for it. They're racist. Now, this came from Arizona. We've got a write-up here from a group called the Thunderbird Law Group. Headlines, ASU graduate sues FAA for alleged discrimination. Again, this is called Brigida versus Buttigieg, because the Secretary of Transportation is the one that's named. According to the FAA partner Collegiate Initiative, as an ASU air traffic management graduate with soaring AT-SAT scores, he came highly recommended and was basically guaranteed a job with the FAA. However, during the typical process of taking the AT-SAT scores, submitting them, and then applying for the job, he was told he needed to start the process over again, throwing out his previous AT-SAT scores. The new AT-SAT test included biographical questions about the test takers. This is the beginning of where Brigida says the discrimination started. He also said the FAA was making it known through several different documents they were trying to gain more diversity within their staff because he's in the race majority, not minority. Brigida says he was denied the job as he didn't add to the diversity. Now, I don't think anybody is surprised that the federal government, especially under this regime, is employing these kind of tactics in qualifying and disqualifying people, not based on their merit, not based on their intelligence, not based on their ability, but based on what box they check on a diversity form. I mean, please look at the spokesperson for the White House in Karine Jean-Pierre, and you see exactly how diversity is elevated over ability. But the good news is, Unlike the White House spokesperson, this isn't really a very critical job. I mean, it's air traffic control. Who wants the best and brightest people in charge of making sure planes take off and land safely? We're going to be fine.